Hi again then guys, and welcome to episode 17 of GT Masters, the review series for Gran Turismo's selection, a pretty broad selection, it has to be said, of GT class or GT style race cars. And in this particular pick we're featuring one of quite a few Skyline or otherwise GTR based race cars that are featured on GT6. There's always been a pretty strong selection of Skyline and GTR based race cars on Gran Turismo, not surprising given the partnership with Nissan, and this particular Skyline race car has been featured on the game for quite a few versions of the game, at least as far back as GT4, if not earlier. And this is the R32 Skyline, the Calsonic GTR race car from 1993. Now, as far as its pure spec, it's a very impressive race car. It's one of the very few old-school race cars that are actually featured on the game. If you think about it, although Gran Turismo does have a lot of race cars, it doesn't have very many old-school race cars, especially if you don't include the Le Mans models. Apart from some of those older Group C cars, there are very few old-school race cars. Which means that unfortunately for the Calsonic Skyline, it doesn't have very many natural rivals on the game. And although that may sound like a good thing, it kind of means that it's either too good to go up against some race cars or not quite good enough to go up against others. Or that's what you could easily assume. Now, as far as spec, it's powered by a 2.6 litre turbo engine, it's all-wheel drive, and as I said, it's based on the R32 GTR, which is a hugely popular Skyline. Now, I mentioned earlier that it has an impressive spec. It really does. 878 horsepower is serious territory for a GT style machine, especially an older one. It also puts out just under 600 foot-pounds of torque and only weighs 1260 kilos, which, given the all-wheel drive, is very good, to say the least. That is lighter than many of the newer race cars featured on the game due to the differences in regulations in the races that this car was involved in. As far as the PP, it sits at 626, which is pretty high for a Skyline, but not too bad given how powerful and light it is. It puts out just under 700 horsepower per tonne, which again, especially for an older model Skyline, is very impressive, and the price is 1 million credits, which I personally think is actually a very good price for this car. Pretty much perfect, in fact. And the reason why I would say that's the case is because, from a performance point of view, not only is it one of the best Skyline race cars in the game, but it's also a historically significant car that makes a fantastic collector's piece. This is one of the most famous and most popular racing Skylines ever. And the fact alone that we have it on the game is cool. There is unarguably an overabundance of Skylines featured on the game. Too many, in fact, far too many. But the racing Skylines that we have on the game are pretty good. We have a good selection of them, especially if you include up to the R35 generation. This is probably the best Skyline race car in the game, as far as I'm concerned. I would say it's a better car than any of the GT6 spec machines for the simple reason that it's completely unique. And Super GT cars aren't really very good collector's pieces for the most part. Not many of them really stand out, which is why the older models such as the Castrol Supra stand out so much, because they are so much more unique. This car is completely unique on Gran Turismo. As I said earlier, it has very few natural rivals, but when you do take it racing, either in career mode or online, it's certainly capable of bringing you victory. It is no slouch, despite being from 1993. Top speed-wise, it's not the strongest of race cars, but that's not too surprising given that it's not the most aerodynamic of cars anyway, and it's also not a premium model. Plus, if you think about it, none of the Skylines are really all that good for top speed on the game. You can get them up around 270, but that's from the road version with significantly more power than this car. So the fact that this can do just over 220 miles per hour with a lower aero setting is actually not bad at all, especially for a non-premium R32 generation Skyline. As far as whether or not you should buy it, I would recommend this car more for specific Skyline fans, or fans of older race cars in general. If you are in either of those camps, you will like this car. It's fun to drive, it has fantastic handling, it looks great, even though it's not a premium model, and it is, all things considered, cheaper than many of the other cars in this series, and that is not to be sniffed at. Now, there are a couple of very distinct advantages I would say this car has. One is how unique it is. We've already mentioned that. Another thing, though, is how responsive this car is to tuning, specifically with regard to its all-wheel drive. With most all-wheel drive cars, even including race cars, no matter what you do to them, they always remain feeling like an all-wheel drive or four-wheel drive performance car. This Skyline can be completely transformed. It doesn't stay as an all-wheel drive handling car. You can make this car handle like a rear-wheel drive car with a few minor changes to the diff and the suspension. That's cool. It means that you have much more personalisation which can be done to this race car, meaning that it's a more universal race car. And what I mean by that is more people can buy it and personalise it to themselves enough to gain victories with it and have fun with it. It's not one of those race cars that no matter what you do to it, always essentially stays the same. This is very much a personalisable and customisable race car. In terms of straight line performance, it's not the quickest of race cars, and in terms of how competitive it is, again, it's not the most competitive. It will not give you victories against any opposition on any track, but against the right opposition, under the right circumstances, I would personally say, especially on endurance events, it's a great car to drive. And the primary downside I would give this car is a minor one, but it is to be noted, and that is the camera view. For some reason, the camera view when driving from third-person view, where you can see the car, is way too close to the camera. The back end of the car fills a large portion of the screen, and I personally hate that. I find it very annoying. That is a minor thing, though. So overall, if you're looking for a unique old-school race car, this is certainly a good option. But that's it overall for this particular review. I'll see you guys next time, and as always, thanks for watching.